Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mission Employable podcast. My name's Ben Oldach. We got a great show for you today. Kathy Leggett is in the studio with me for the first time in what feels like several weeks.
It does feel like a long time, Ben.
What have you been up to?
Yeah, I've been working.
No
Just
way.
Not in the studio. Yeah.
Well, it's good to have you here. Hopefully, you've been having a good start to the football season. I know you're a big Packers fan, so we've got that going on. My Ravens are off to a decent start. We lost a heartbreaker to Buffalo.
Yes.
But I think that's going to be a blip on the radar for the rest of the season. Anyway, we're not here to talk about football.
That's right.
As much as I would love to turn this into a football podcast, we are actually here to talk about entrepreneurship. And with us is Malinda Shultice. She is the Professor of Entrepreneurship at Iowa State University. So, Malinda, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So why don't you just kind of give us a little bit about yourself? You don't have to tell us about your favorite football team, though you can if you want to. But yeah, give us a little bit of background.
As long as it's not the Vikings.
Right.
It's not the Vikings.
Okay.
A little bit about me. I am a professor at Iowa State. I get to teach there full time. And yes, I said get to because I feel honored to get to do what I do every day. Prior to that, though, I managed retirement communities. So senior living was never on my radar, but I ended up in that world after graduation and remained there for about 10 years. So in the midst of me teaching at Iowa State, I also created a healthcare consulting company because one of the things that I noticed was a lack in the basic elements of leadership that we don't necessarily give people when they get into an industry. So I kind of have a dual life right now. I teach, and then I also run a consulting company on the side.
Very cool. And we're going to get into a little bit about that more as we get into the podcast, because that's an interesting kind of career path that you've taken to get to where you are now. But I guess, first of all, kind of why did you make the decision to transition from healthcare into that higher education?
That is a great question. And honestly, it was time. It was time for me to figure out how to grow. And all of the things that I had thought that I wanted, I achieved that title that coveted title that you get, and you have the money that goes along with it. But then I realized it was still not in alignment with who I was anymore. It was time to grow and change and pivot. And I think I knew I always wanted to teach, but I thought that was going to be more for like my 60, 70-year-old self. And instead it ended up being 30 years earlier. And I decided to pivot and teach. And I have found exactly what it is I'm supposed to be doing. And I feel pretty honored to have found that this early on in the game. What
about teaching really kind of grabs you? Like, I know some people are called to it, but like for you specifically, like what happens in the classroom that like really keeps getting you out of bed every morning?
My favorite moment, because the class that I teach at Iowa State is a requirement for all business students. So some take it because they want to, others not so much. Mm-hmm. Others are not so excited to walk into my classroom. The aha moment for me is when I see them realize that they could be an entrepreneur at some point in their life, either in that immediate moment or after they graduate. So I get to see the light bulb come on for people and realize that their life doesn't have to be following this straight trajectory of what it is that they might be studying. So it's just a moment of people realizing how much bigger their world can be. And that's really cool to watch.
Oh, I think that is so great. And I think so many things. I feel like to sit back and if you really look at and think about all the entrepreneurs there are and small business, it's really amazing. And it's amazing how many talented creative people are out there and have done that, have taken a risk, so to speak, to maybe do that. So I love that you teach that and that it is part of a required curriculum because just what you said, sometimes you never think about it. I also, before I ask you the next question though, I just think in your first comments, Malinda, you brought so many things together and that I just want to point out are important. When we're talking employment, we're talking careers, we're talking, but we're also talking purpose and passion. And so for anyone, I think you can kind of get in your everyday doldrums. I don't know. I just want to say, but I just feel like listening to you've just reminded me so much of the importance of lifelong learning, looking for opportunities, being able to adapt and change and know that you can do it and to take risk. And that's all part of what we have to do when we're maybe thinking of a new career or looking to it or just looking to expand our skill set. So thank you for bringing all those to light too. I just think you made me think of them and I wanted to share it. But now back to the curriculum. What kind of curriculum are you what are you teaching the students in the classes that you teach?
My class is very simplistic. I get to teach them how to do a feasibility analysis, how to do a business model canvas, and really in theory, they can leave my class with the basic principles of walking away of how to start a business.
So great.
Because so many people walk in, and I myself, until I went through the process of starting my own business, you always look at other people and think, oh, they have it figured out, but I don't. And I didn't want the students to feel like they didn't understand that barrier of what it was like to be an entrepreneur. So they walk away with the basic skill sets of how to start a business. And I feel like I can't gift them any more than that, because then they can decide what they want to do with it, which is the best part.
It is. It's so worthwhile.
That's really interesting, because like that seems like such a daunting task to start your own business. And I could imagine that so many people have a great idea, or they know what they would like to do, but they have no concept of where to begin. And it sounds like, from what you're saying, that there is kind of like, I don't want to say like a cookie cutter approach, but like certainly like a roadmap of the things that you need to kind of get out of the way first when starting a business.
Yes, and that's exactly right, because we oftentimes, that's one of my favorite things that I get to say in class. Oftentimes what sets entrepreneurs apart from other people that aren't an entrepreneur yet, because we all have it within us. It's not just a specific type of person. That's another common misconception. Anyone can be their own business owner. But entrepreneurs are good about action. They just jump in and they do, even without having everything figured out. Because I can tell you, I certainly don't have everything figured out, and I'm an entrepreneur. But with that being said, it can feel daunting and intimidating for students to not even know where to start. And so we start with hard tasks that any entrepreneur should know how to do. And so then they can decide, if they don't do anything with my class, but 5 years down the road after graduation, they want to start a business, they have the tools to be able to decide, okay, Professor Shultice said I need to start with the feasibility analysis. Then I need to move on to the business model canvas, and I need to figure out how to market after that. They have this basic trajectory of how they can follow and gauge themselves with their business. So I try to alleviate some of that intimidation factor for sure.
Yeah. And is there opportunities for them to take like further classes in entrepreneurship at the business school up there? I got to imagine that there's other larger, kind of like more niche components of the whole thing.
Yeah, honestly, the sky's the limit there. They even have classes where they pair you with engineering students and marketing students, and you can come up with the prototype for the business model you created. So really, you can take it as far as you want. We have some students that already have businesses established by the time they're in my class. And some have even decided to establish it by the end of my class. So they can decide to take marketing classes, sales classes. They can figure out how to create their prototype. They can really go as far as they want with it.
That's what I was going to ask you is do you have any examples of, like maybe a student that went through your class and what they're doing now? Or as you said, maybe they came in and they expand. I'm just curious. Do you have an example you can share?
I had a really quiet student, and he was an engineering student last semester, and I could always tell he was listening, but he was hard to read. And he had this really genius idea to somehow come up with a concept of you would put a device on a steering wheel, and if you were falling asleep at the wheel, or if someone was, impaired behind the wheel, it would help to vibrate to keep them awake or kind of notify them to get off the road. And he decided to take the prototyping class after and the marketing class. And he sent me a message, actually just a few weeks ago, and said, thank you so much. I have had this idea for years, but didn't know what to do with it. And so really my class helped to bring him out of his shell. I didn't do anything other than gave him what I think he needed was permission to go and pursue this. And so that's a very large scale example.
Mm-hmm. It's great though.
But I have quite a few of them that are vaguely reminiscent of that. And that's exactly what feels purposeful for me to be doing.
Definitely.
What I'm doing.
Yeah, that's so cool.
How do you think entrepreneurship courses have changed over the last 10 years or so? I mean, obviously there's been some massive changes even within the last 5 years in our society. I'm just curious how things have kind of grown and changed over the last several years.
Yeah, especially after the pandemic and during the pandemic, that has really changed the trajectory of entrepreneurship, because so many people were either starting businesses or decided to do something about a business afterward. And so we have seen, and the data is still pretty preliminary, but the data is off the charts for how many businesses have been started post-pandemic and even now. It's almost like people decided that they didn't need to wait any longer, and they don't have to wait. They never did have to wait, but they really realized that they didn't have to wait. So we've seen a huge influx in entrepreneurship, which is amazing.
That is so cool. So how do you use your experience with your own consulting, starting your own business to assist you in your teaching? I think that's incredibly valuable.
I think I always learned best by hearing real world people, and I needed to hear how what I was learning in theory in the classroom could translate into the real world. That's how I always learned best, and I try to give that to the students too, because the failures that I experience, the peers that I work with that I know have failed, the honest to gosh rigors of the day, they need to know, because if they're interested in being an entrepreneur, I mean, some days you work really long hours. Sometimes I work on the weekends. Sometimes I'm up in the middle of the night doing random tasks. And that's just the reality of it. And so I get to give them firsthand experience of what this looks like rather than just, giving them the theory because I've never actually done it. I feel like I can kind of be on that journey with them because I am on that journey myself. So I can be kind of parallel with them in a sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think that helps individuals be prepared, hopefully, for some of the things that they may face when they get into it. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, you kind of brought up something that I thought was a little interesting, was just that, like, when you're starting your own business, a lot of failure. That's just part of it, right? How do you talk to your students about kind of being okay with failure and using that as a launching point for future successes?
That's a great question. We literally just covered the failure module yesterday. So it's funny, and the irony is not lost on me. Part of it is helping them to realize that it's not a personal matter. It is not a personal attack, and it's just business. And I try to teach them to look at it as growth, because most entrepreneurs, I mean, to be honest, when I first started my company, I thought I was going to be training the hard skill sets of the job that I used to do. It has completely deviated in a year and a half. So I have had to focus on helping them reshift that thought process from failure to growth opportunity and a shift in their mindset, because failure is not a bad thing in entrepreneurship. It means you're continuing to try and to show up, and you're pivoting to what the consumer is needing, and which is what we have to pay attention to as an entrepreneur. So by the end of the class, a lot of them see failure as a welcome friend rather than a foe at that point.
That's awesome. I like that. A welcome friend. It's good.
Your consulting firm really focuses on helping some of these senior living centers and administrators build up their soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I'm sure there are some soft skills that are very specific to that industry, but a lot of it can be transferable. And I just want to know kind of like what you're really highlighting as like, these are the top priorities for soft skills nowadays. And maybe someone outside of that industry could potentially, take something from that.
Yeah. To be honest, I have been drug outside of healthcare more times than I can care to express, because these are transferable skills to any industry. But my biggest focus is on active listening and being a compassionate leader and helping people to effectively communicate, because communication deficiencies tends to be one of the number one areas of concern in almost any industry. And so I teach people the very simplistic basics. I've taught CEOs all the way down to frontline workers. It doesn't matter, because everyone could be better at being an active and compassionate listener. And that's just being engaged in the conversation and caring enough to hear that person's story within their story. And none of us have enough hours in the day. But in order to create a healthy workplace culture, we have to take it back to the basics. And so I try not to focus on the hard skills, because we can check those off on a checklist. But the soft skills, I think it was Harvard that just published something not even a year ago that 85% of employers are looking to hire people with soft skills. And it's not always easy, because not everyone is prepared for that or even knows what that looks like. And so absolutely, I have focused on healthcare, but I found myself being pulled outside of healthcare because it's needed in so many different industries. And so I really focus on the basics: compassionate listening, empathy, how to be an effective leader when you're managing through risk, all of those things that we don't really talk about in a practical way that I can implement in my day-to-day. Because that's the other thing. I make sure it's something that can be implemented in their day-to-day. I don't want it to just be theoretical.
Sure.
I want them to be able to take it back to their workplace and start effective immediately, because we're all short on time, but we need these skill sets. So that's what my big focus is on.
You're highlighting, just like you said, you when you were talking about your experience, you kind of adapted, right? And that just helps also demonstrate the exact things that you're talking about are things that we hear consistently from employers regardless of the industry. And so they are those very valuable transferable skills, communication, teamwork, listening, that you are focused on, not only in your business, but in the classroom as well, which we really need to focus on everywhere. So that's a real credit to you.
Thank you.
Has those soft skills and like what people are looking for kind of changed over the last several years? I mean, the pandemic was a huge flashpoint just in general, and it's a good marker of time. But like, have things changed like from pre-pandemic and post-pandemic in terms of what people look for in soft skills, at least from what you've seen?
Yes, and the fact that so many industries were impacted by working from home parameters or hybrid parameters, or simply having to pivot and readjust what your skills were because your company maybe didn't need you in the capacity that they did during the pandemic. So many of the things that we're having to focus on now are communications based, because we're now having to figure out how to communicate effectively around the globe with people in different time zones and different cultures. And how do we still maintain, ethical practices and effective communication practices when oftentimes we're not sitting in the same space? And how do we do it with compassion and understanding, and adding that humanness back into the workplace? Because oftentimes we accidentally, as leaders, strip the humanity from workplaces because everyone needs to get their tasks done. We're all busy and there's never enough hours in the day. But the reality is, creating a psychologically safe environment and having a healthy workforce is so valuable. You can't even put a price on it. Yeah. So much of what I'm seeing now is communications based.
Yeah, for sure. And, not that like hybrid work schedules or remote work schedules can't work or can't be super effective, but the meeting via Zoom is going to be a lot different than meeting in person. And how do you navigate that, right? And like, how do you take those kind of same communication skills that you would have had if the person was sitting across from you and implementing that over a piece of technology? And like I said, not bad, different.
Exactly. And it's not bad at all. It's us figuring out how to pivot and adapt. And that's where we have to make sure that we're good at reading the verbal and nonverbal cues in a conversation that maybe we didn't have to pay attention as much to. When we're in person, it's easy to see that, but it's not so easy when you're across a screen and maybe 8 hours apart from that person. So we've had to adapt as individuals and as professionals in order to make the business run operationally more smooth.
Yeah, definitely. So if someone's listening to this podcast or they're either them for themselves or they know someone who wants to start their own business, what are some advice that you would give them?
I would tell them first and foremost, you don't have to have all of the answers figured out, because we cripple ourselves by thinking we have to have everything figured out. And that is not the case. 99% of entrepreneurs, if they tell you they have it figured out, they're probably fooling you or pulling your leg, because everyone is just constantly trying to figure out how to make sure that they're meeting the consumer's needs, which are ever changing. Mm-hmm. The other thing is I would adopt a growth mindset, because you never really arrive. You're never, maybe your goal was to make a great sum of money or, change this initiative. But even once you reach those goals, you're still going to have to adapt in order to continue to be purposeful to your customer base. So you never really arrive, and you have to be okay with that. It's exciting. You got to embrace that part of the journey. So those would be a couple of things that I would just tell people to be mindful of when they jump into the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. And what about for people that maybe aren't planning on going to school? Like, obviously you have a great launching point with your entrepreneurship course, but for whatever reason, maybe it's just them personally, maybe they don't have the financial resources to go to college, but they still want to start their own business. Like, what route would you lead them down?
Honestly, they have no barriers either. They can just jump in and go. I am fortunate enough that I have degrees, but I needed those for my past life. I didn't necessarily need those to be an entrepreneur. And anyone can go jump in even without the education. You just have to have the desire to actually go attach some action to your idea and do something about it. So if you can, eventually if you want to add education, you can, but it is not a necessity by any means. You just have to have the desire to see something through and go through with it. And even on the days you don't feel motivated to do it, you still have to do it, because as an entrepreneur, there's no one that's going to drag you along and tell you those things that you should be doing. That has to come from within. So no barriers. Go for it.
Yeah. Is there any place that you would direct them for like learning? Like if they wanted to like hear from either like mentors or, other successful entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I would. Udemy always has great free courses on a plethora of things. It's an online learning platform that has a lot of free different options. And honestly, one of the best things they can do is get out there and talk to people in the industry that they want to get into. So networking is so key. And I know some people would rather crawl in a hole than have to do that. But once you get out into the industry that you're interested in starting a business and talking to not only fellow business owners, but consumers in that market, you have a pretty clear idea of what gaps exist in a market and where you can jump in with your idea and how it would fit. So even if you decide that you don't want to do anything education-based, you can jump in and you need to start doing that market research and getting yourself out there and asking questions and networking.
For sure.
What's the website you said?
Udemy, Udemy. Udemy.
Thank you so much.
It's a great resource.
You've given so many good pointers for people. I just feel like this has been incredibly valuable. So everybody listening, please share with somebody else because this is good information for everyone. Just one last question here. And I feel like you've already given us a lot of this, but is there something that you found in common is common with all successful entrepreneurs and maybe something that goes, beyond work hard, first one in, last one out, those typical things that we hear?
A lot of entrepreneurs have figured out how to work smarter and not harder. So I would say a commonality is figuring out how to be your most efficient self without having to have your hours accounted for at work every second of every day. And so there's a level of efficiency that most entrepreneurs have where they try to draw some sense of boundary so they have a life outside of their business and that it doesn't define them. And so I would say that boundaries and efficiency tend to be a common trait that I see across a lot of successful people.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you bring up because I feel like a lot of, some of the social media stuff is all about like grind culture, hustle culture, whatever you want to call it, like where you have to be this kind of performative business person where you're like, I sleep 4 hours a day, like if you aren't working 18 hours a day, you're losing ground to people. Right. And like, there's something to be said for working hard, but like you said, making sure that it's efficient. And that can be, man, you could put that with anything. I remember people in college when I was in school, they'd be pulling these all-nighters studying for their test. And, was that really the most efficient use of their time? Like maybe not. And just because there's a number of hours that you log in at the end of every week doesn't necessarily correlate to like productivity.
Yes. We have to look, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you should look at the sustainability of your day. Some days you're going to spend a lot more time doing your work and other days not so much, but that's the beauty of being an entrepreneur. But this grind and hustle culture leads to burnout, which almost every industry is. And I dealt with that myself. I did it to myself. And I'm a recovering burnout-aholic, I'm going to call myself, because it really does nothing for you in the long run if you end up having to quit because you've done that to yourself. So if you can look at the long game and the sustainability of your days as an entrepreneur, if you want to grind and only sleep 4 hours a day, I guess good for you, but that does not have to look like the pillar of success in entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be. And we need to work on that, as most industries do, because we have set that as the bar for expectation. And it scares people away from wanting to start a company because that doesn't have to be the reality. It doesn't have to be that.
All right, Malinda. Well, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us on the podcast. If anybody wants to get in touch with you for anything, best way for them to reach out?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I am a LinkedIn junkie, or I have a website, melindashultice.com too, and you can find my email address and everything on there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Malinda, for swinging by.
Thank you.